Please get your coffee, come and sit down. The people online want us. Dodie. Dodie. Please take a seat. We want to start.
It's hard to get traction right now.
Okay, people, come and have a seat. We are beginning with our welcome because, just because, it's almost time for Janice to leave. Won't that be a shame? I like that. That was good. Okay, welcome. Well, Community of Engagement is back for another season of 24-25. Bringing
Woohoo! Come on, give a little love for that. It's back.
Bringing to you Wednesdays at the Temple each month, wonderful luminaries, and you are both luminaries. It's a word I've coined and like. And Dick Hutman for opera, and Linda Thal for wise aging. This is a chance, and Jonathan Dober for current events. This is the time to reflect to the personalized note that will be coming out to you today, describing the year's program as far as we've really done the year's work. And I will also mention that Sukkot evening, COE is sponsoring a bring your own dinner prior to Sukkot. I know but it's a gathering, and the gathering is what we do. Look what we do. Okay, and today, well, we're just thrilled. We're thrilled beyond, I'm out of my skin. I'm so happy to have you here with those gorgeous glasses and the eyes, and I see more than the glasses today, and I just gonna love hearing from you. Looking forward to your conversations, okay, and to share our conversation back at you. Okay, Linda Levine and myself run this and run it to the best of our ability. And we love that you attend. We love that you're online, and just keep coming, and it's kind of a love fest. And now let's have Dodie, who knows Janice long and well, to say a couple of words.
Dodie, who's leaving it to your imagination where her loyalties for the election lie. You will just have to reach your own conclusions.
What is the lesson you're going to?
I said where your loyalties for the election are. We'll just have to reach our own conclusions.
Right? I mean, better keep this.
It's unusual to have somebody introducing Janice rather than...
This is true.
Right? I'm used to her putting a program on. Okay, you don't have to, we did. Anyway, welcome, Janice. We have looked forward to today enormously. Janice is a product of UCLA, local hometown girl, practiced law, was the president of the California Women's Law Organization, right? The biggest female organization of lawyers. and then created with Rabbi Harold Schulweis of blessed memory, the wonderful Jewish World Watch, which continues today, although Janice, after many years of leading it, went off and started America at a Crossroads, and we have all, I think, benefited enormously from both, but especially from America at a Crossroads. It continues now. Once a week isn't enough. Twice a week we have to be aware. But the good thing is that all of them have been recorded, and we can listen anytime if we miss something. And every once in a while I bump into someone who's never even heard of it, so they're going to have a lot of listening to do. In any case, recently, 50-year wedding anniversary, right? And this is the gal who you know is so busy, but she's not too busy to do something very special. 2.5 years ago, we sat here, my family and I. My daughter passed away in Israel. We had Shiva right here, and I looked around, and there was Janice. She makes time for what's important to her, and I will never forget that. I might have forgotten almost everybody who was there that night, but I remember that you were there. In any case, everybody, welcome Janice Kamener-Resnick.
So good morning, everybody. It is a great treat to have this time with all of you, have this time with Janice, and I want to proceed our conversation by expressing, as we're at the embarking point of another amazing year with the community of engagement, special thanks, of course, to Judy and to Linda for their leadership of the COE, for not only this day, but throughout another year of what promises to be rich programming and community building for all of you. Still an incredible light within our congregation, so really deeply grateful to the two of you. With regard to our conversation today, I want to make certain that you all have a little bit of a sense of the can-do woman that I'm sitting next to, because we're going to, I promise you, talk about Jews United for Democracy and Justice and America at a Crossroads, which is probably the primary point of your connection, seeing her on a weekly basis, introducing extraordinary guests for really important conversations in this deeply troubled time. But some of us go back a long way with Janice and are aware of how her activism, her career, all of the puzzle pieces of an extraordinarily busy but impactful life come together to create the foundation for the experience we're now having regularly every week with Judge and with America at a Crossroads. So I want to roll the clock back, if we can. If I'm not mistaken, the very earliest roots of your Jewish activism began with the Soviet Jewry fight. Am I correct on that?
You're absolutely right. But before you ask,
Oh, even before, yes.
I just have to say, what a warm welcome you've given me today. It's so wonderful to walk into the room. I now know how Taylor Swift feels when she walks into the room. I mean, it was just very heartwarming, and I'm very appreciative.
Are you making an endorsement the same way she did last night? Because we're here, all ears.
I need to make my change. Would have little impact, but I just wanted to thank you all for that.
So tell us a little bit about, if that's where the story begins in terms of your own Jewish activism, set us in that scene. When is this? Where are you in your life? And how does that capture your imagination? And what does that work, that first nugget of your Jewish activism look like?
That was my very first job in the world where I actually got paid to work was for the Jewish Federation doing Soviet Jewry activism. And actually, my sense of needing to be activist came much before that as a child, because the example of my parents, I think, sort of instilled in me, as it probably did in most other people who are involved Jewishly, that sense of duty to the world, service. I mean, I remember being a child and back in the days of paper drives in the Red Wagon and going through the neighborhood with, collecting newspapers, and a sin in my family where my mother would, the only people she didn't like were people who didn't vote, and we'd go from house to house making sure people voted. And my aunt had polio as a child, and my mother was very committed at the time to the March of Dimes, and we'd right in October 1973 that, of course, the war in Israel started. And I found myself having a very difficult time being in a therapy session, learning how to do that when this war was raging in Israel. And so what I did was I completed my semester of field work, and then I realized I wanted to switch into community organizing. I had organized, I grew up at Sinai Temple, and I went and organized a whole Israel campaign in '73, and then in 1974 I decided on community organizing. I got my master's in social work and my master's in nonprofit management at the Hebrew Union College, and that led me into a field placement at the Federation, where the Soviet Jewry movement at the time in the organized Jewish community was very subdued, and the activism really came from outside the Federation with like Zev Yaroslavsky and Cy Frumpkin and much more sort of belligerent activism. And it was a time that I felt the Federation needed to become more vocally activist, and their Soviet Jewry program was much more subdued. So I had asked Murray Wood at the time, who was, and Charlie Posner, these are names that, I mean, Laura Kaplansky would know, and Dodie Thompson would know. I asked them if I could step into that position when the current director was going to resign, and they agreed. So in 1975, I became the director of the Commission on Soviet Jewry, went to the Soviet Union, and did just amazing activism and work there. It was very compelling, and it was very natural for me to want to do that. And the activism, to me, that really resonated with my Jewish identity.
Yeah, and of course, this ends up leading through that early chapter to a decision to also pursue a law degree and ultimately a career in environmental law. Tell us a little bit about that transition and that work.
Okay, now that's a funny story. This is sort of an odd story that's very personal, but I'm going to share it with you because I feel like I know you all. My husband and I got married in 1974, and we wanted to have a lot of kids, and we were very young. I'm 72 now, so I was like 23, 24 at the time. And we couldn't have children. We were having some major fertility problems. And everybody, my sisters, I'm one of 5 children, everybody was having kids. And my friends were having kids, so I was very upset. And this went on for several years. And I finally said to my husband, we need to come up with plan B for having children. So he said, well, by the time we're 30, if we haven't been able to resolve this problem, then we can start adoption work. And I was 27 at the time. So I said, what am I going to do for the next 3 years that is going to completely occupy me and get my mind off of this problem? And so that, my husband had just finished law school, one of my sisters had, and my father, may he rest in peace, was a dentist who decided to go to law school at the same time. And I didn't see any of them for 3 years. They were completely absorbed in the law. So I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to law school. Because then, and sure enough, it worked because 9 months before I graduated law school, I got pregnant. So if anybody ever wants, it's a very unlikely story. I'm sure it's not what you expected when you asked me that. But because I really didn't know anything about law. I had no real interest in it. But that was also ended up being just another piece of the puzzle for me to have that kind of knowledge and the brain to work in that kind of way. And environmental law was another complete accident because I had my first child in April, I graduated law school in May, took the bar in July, and didn't want to go, I had an offer from a big law firm, but didn't want to go work downtown. I had a new baby that I had waited a long time for. My husband had his own practice, and he said, I'll move my practice to the Valley, because we live in the Valley, and I'll put your name on your door. The first day you're my partner. And so we did that, and he said, but there's only one condition. He says, I want to go into another specialty. You have to take my real estate litigation matters. Well, at the time, environmental law was just starting. There were no classes in law schools yet. And a lot of his clients were having problems with being pursued by governmental entities for environmental problems. And so I said, I don't know anything about anything, so I'll take, I'll learn, I can learn whatever I need to learn. And that's how I got into environmental law. So it was also not a passion, and it was not public interest. It was, for private real estate owners who were, some of it I felt like was public interest because there were some unfair components to the law. And it did help serve because I was helping people clean up real estate and groundwater problems. But anyway, that's how I got it. And I did practice environmental law for about 25 years. But the most important part of my practice was not I hate to say it, was not the work I was doing in the office. I loved the advocacy work through California Women Lawyers. It was a pro-choice movement. I testified in Congress on various pieces of feminist legislation. So that was the really fun part, getting more women. This is a time when there were no women partners in law firms, no women judges on the bench. So that was the advocacy work we were doing, and that really made my law practice much more satisfying for me. So it was sort of consistent with the activism that I always sort of was gravitating to.
So this sounds like a very busy, accomplished, and fulfilled life, right? So now let's talk about the time that you were a LA County, on the LA County Commission and the service there, because I'm assuming that you probably assumed that there wouldn't be a whole lot of extra time for some additional commitments, but I promise you we have a few to discuss even before we make it to talking about Judge and America at a Crossroads. The County Commission, how does that happen? And tell us about your service there.
Okay, well, part of the activism that I always, and my husband as well, was political, local, and national politics. But at the time, local politics was very interesting and very consonant with building our law firm. My husband is a land use lawyer. He continues 50 some odd years later to represent people who have zoning issues. So he was, by definition, very involved in politics. And I really enjoyed supporting female candidates. So I got involved, and it happens that Ben and Zev went to high school together, Zev Yaroslavsky. So we became, of course, continue, and to this day, as you know, to continue to be very good friends. And I think it was Zev, when he was on the city council, first appointed me to a city commission. They're always looking for people, with experience and with, with gravitas to sit on some of these commissions. The commission, when Zev became a supervisor, he appointed me to the Economy and Efficiency Commission. I sat on the Judicial Procedures Commission. So I sat on 2 or 3 different commissions. And they were a little more frustrating. But on one of the commissions, this was my second commission experience, I went to his staff and said, I'm only willing to take this job if we can actually do something. I said, I don't want to just come downtown every month and sit in boring meetings. And I said, we knew that self-help in the legal world was becoming increasingly important because of the huge cost for middle income and lower income people for lawyers. And they have this, a lot of legal problems with landlord-tenant law and basic consumer law. So he agreed, his office agreed, that if I could organize the first self-help clinic at a courthouse, they would put up $500,000 to have the first self-help legal clinic in a courthouse. Wow. And we set it up it's been about 25 years or so now. And now, because it was so successful and had, we set up it ended up becoming a very big and important operation where lawyers volunteer, people can get paralegal assistance, people can get help filling out forms. We have multilingual translators within the court. So it's right there in the courthouse that people can go get the help they need. And it was so successful that every supervisor fought for one in their district. So it became a multi-million-dollar project of LA County that's now many, many years old and considered a vital resource for middle and low income. We don't do this was fundamental to the program. We don't do income checking. We don't do citizenship checking. We don't do any of that. Anybody who feels that they could get a service was able to come into these centers. And still, if you go to the Van Nuys Courthouse, you'll see that the Self-Help Legal Access Center is there, fully staffed, as it is. There's one in every single council person's district in a courthouse. So that was what I did on that commission. And then my work was done there, which felt great. And after about 6 or 7 or maybe 10 years on that commission, I resigned.
Yes, yes.
It was enough.
And if this was your life, Dayenu, right? Except there was also Beit Teshuvah, unless I'm forgetting correctly. Huge, huge role of volunteer leadership in one of LA's greatest jewels and an institution that, frankly, is deeply needed in every locality, but there really is nothing quite like Beit Teshuvah anywhere else. Tell us a little bit about your leadership there and also the great passion that you have for Beit Teshuvah.
This is another very personal story that I'm very happy to share because I think more people need to share all the beautiful things in our life and the things that cause us grief and hurt. I had a brother and then a son, both of whom were afflicted with addiction. My brother, it was quite a shock to my family, and one day one of my sisters and I got a call that he had been arrested, and he tells his story, so I'm not telling tales out of school. He had been arrested on some outstanding traffic warrant, and he was in jail in Nevada. And of course, this was like both of my parents. My mother's still alive. She was 100 years old 2 weeks ago. But this was a huge shock, as it would be in any family in this room. I'm sure it was just, we had no idea he had warrants. We didn't know he was in trouble, and they had found some drug paraphernalia in his car. So this was not just outstanding tickets. It was more serious than that. And once we got our wits about it, we immediately called. I knew Rabbi Borovitz, who at the time was with Beit Tshuva. He's no longer there, but he and his wife were the founders of Beit Tshuva some 30 years ago. And this goes back about 15 years ago with my brother, maybe 17 years ago. And we asked Mark what to do. He said, well, Nevada does not have it's not an extradition, it's not a alternative sentencing state. In California, if you're in jail or even in prison or about to be sentenced on a drug or addiction related charge, you can ask the court that they give you alternative sentencing. And one of the places that we do a lot of this at Beit Tshuva, probably 50% of our residents come directly from prison or jail as an alternative sentence that the judge has approved, released the person to Beit Tshuva, where they have to check in. They have a probation officer, they have to check in, they have to drug test, etc. So he agreed, but Nevada didn't have alternative sentencing. He got on a plane, he flew to Nevada for the court appearance. He convinced the judge there to release my brother to him, and my brother came to Beit Tshuva. It took my brother 3 or 4 times to actually fully recover, but now he is, thank God, a grandfather of 2 amazing granddaughters and fully recovered and working. But meanwhile, a couple of years after this happened with my brother, my son, who had just graduated from MIT, he was a very smart guy in math and other subjects that are beyond me, but he came back. He had a job at an investment banking firm, and within a month he wanted to quit. And we said, you can't quit a job after a month. I mean, that really messes your life up, it messes your resume up. And we watched him over the course of about 6 months continue to decline. And it was clear to us, and of course he wasn't telling us, but it was clear to us he had a serious problem with drugs. And he eventually quit the job. He actually lived on the streets. And this went on for about several years, where, we were hiring private investigators to go find him. It was a horrible, if anybody in the room has ever gone through this with a loved one, you know what I'm talking about, how painful, difficult. You don't know if your child's alive or dead. It was really awful time. And we were, every time we'd find him, we'd help him if he'd go with a therapist, if he would drug test, but drug addicts cheat. So, they say they're testing, but they're not. It's not legitimate, et cetera. So finally, it took me my husband is a Holocaust survivor's child. And it's very difficult, I think more difficult for children of survivors to do tough love than it is for those of us who aren't. I wanted to do tough love much earlier. It took my husband some years, like 3 years. Finally, one day, we get a call. My son was in a sober living house. We get a call that we're going to be very upset with him because they aren't letting him back in the house because he relapsed. And of course, he thought we were going to come and take him home and take him, back to, wherever. And my husband finally agreed. We were on the way to a funeral when we got this call. And of course, we went to the place. It was pouring rain that day. And this time my husband agreed. He says, okay, it's clearly not working. We have to do it your way. And either way, our son could have died. That was why, it's such a complicated situation, because if you do tough love, they can die, and if you don't do tough love, they can die. And so many people do and had experienced that, and we knew that. So we get to the house in West LA, the sober living house, and he's outside, And the day before, we had brought him all of his clothes from home because he was supposed to go job hunting. And he said, well, you know, can I put the stuff in your car? We said, no, we're not going to take your stuff. He says, well, can I come and stay at the house? And we said, no. And I said, you know, your behavior is just outrageous. You've hurt too many of us, and you're hurting yourself, and you can't come home. And he says, well, what am I supposed to do with all this stuff? Somebody will kill me if they see me with, you know, a market basket. The guy had put all of his stuff in a market basket. The owner of the house had done that. And we said, no, we're not taking you, we're not taking your stuff. If you are afraid of being killed because of the stuff, give the stuff away and you won't have stuff. And it's, you know, you have to figure this out. And I said, and the last thing I said to him was, your uncle, my brother, lives a few blocks from here. If you'd like, you can go to him and he can take you to Beit Tshuva. And I'm sure they would take you as a charity case because we're not paying for anything else. So, of course, I had already called Rabbi Borovitz and I said, if my son comes in, don't let him know that we have anything to do with this because it hasn't worked, us trying to help him. And my husband then said to him, and I'll never forget this, he says, I do have one thing that I can give you. And I guess my son thought it was going to be money or a credit card or something. Ben got a big golf umbrella out of his car and gave it to him. And the last thing we saw that morning was him walking down the street with this, I mean, here's our MIT graduate, beautiful 24-year-old son, walking down in the pouring rain with his stuff and a golf umbrella, as in, you know, like a homeless, it was very, very awful day for us. But meanwhile, he did go to Beit Tshuva the next day, and that was about 14 years ago, and he's been sober. He had one little, not drug related, but when you talk about sobriety, he had a glass of wine about 2 or 3 years ago, and that was considered a relapse for him, so he's back on the recounting, but for me, I count drug sobriety. He's been sober for many years, and he's working his steps, and he's doing really well. And he's a teacher. He's a math teacher at Highland Hall High School in the Valley at a Waldorf school. So he's doing pretty well. Anyway, I got very involved with Beit Tshuva.
Well, this is the thing. That's a beautiful story, and it's obviously the centerpiece
Right.
of Janice's inspiration. But with regard to volunteerism at Beit Tshuva, you know, there are a lot of folks who live a story like this heroically as parents supporting their child, and then they don't end up actually running and honored by Beit Tshuva. How does that end up happening?
Right.
Because you didn't have a lot of time, it would seem.
Yeah, but you know, you don't have time until there's something important to do, and then you do it. And I thought it was really important to get involved at Beit Tshuva because Beit Tshuva, everybody should support Beit Tshuva, but the main support for Beit Tshuva comes from people like us who benefited from the service, and if we don't get involved and support it, then it's going to die as an organization. I mean, it houses 130 addicts at a time, which means it's several hundred a year because people stay 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. So, you know, I knew it was really important, and I felt extremely grateful. And I got involved on the board, and after 6 or 7 years became chair of the board, and I still am very active mentoring people on the board, bringing new people in, fundraising for Beit Tshuva. They do almost everybody's on scholarship at Beit Tshuva, either because they come and their family's so disgusted with them that they don't want anything to do with them, or like us, frustrated with your child and it's not working, so you can't pay anymore. Or poor people. I mean, people come off the streets that are referred to Beit Tshuva who don't have resources. But those of us with resources, you know, need to give back, and they need leadership. They must have leadership. Otherwise, it's a nonprofit organization. It needs good, responsible leadership. So it's a very big part of my life. And, you know, it doesn't take 30 hours a week, other than when you're chair, to just be involved, to care, to help do what you can do, and bring other people in and be committed to the organization. We go most Friday nights to Beit Tshuva. My mother comes almost every Friday night to Beit Tshuva, and they did a birthday party for her there last Friday night. So it's become a big part of our family. We go like in packs. There's 20 of us that go to Beit Tshuva when we go there for the high holidays. It's very inspirational. You should try it on a Friday night. I don't want to take customers away from
You should try. It's fine. They're loyal customers. Go try out Beit Tshuva for a Friday night. This is all good.
It's an amazing place to go for Shabbat, and you can watch online too. That's my Beit Tshuva story.
It's an extraordinary one, and it's important for you to know that there is not a big Jewish town. Obviously, Los Angeles, second largest Jewish community in America. There's not a congregational rabbi in this city that has not multiple times reached out to Beit Tshuva to assist a family within the congregation. Me, many times, sometimes directly to Janice, actually, as even most recently, directly to Janice as a conduit for helping to establish some kind of a connection, get a space that's precious space to be able to, because the resources are limited, precious space to be able to help out these folks whose lives are filled with potential, if only they can figure out a way to beat the deep challenges of addiction. It's an extraordinary part of Janice's story, and we're not even to America at a Crossroads yet. So, because I need to now roll the clock back to where Janice and I first get to know one another. It's early in my time here at Leo Baeck. Believe it or not, it's my 22nd year at Leo Baeck, so it's been a long, long run here at this point. And if you roll the clock back to the very beginning, many of you will remember, of course, that there was a horrible genocide taking place in Darfur. And we had a Darfur focus group that was the centerpiece of all the activism we were doing at Leo Baeck Temple. Some of you will remember that we organized all of Jewish Los Angeles to travel to the Bay Area for the giant Darfur rally that was taking place. I think this was in 2005. It's actually where, because we were organizing more broadly beyond Leo Baeck Temple, there was a young rabbinical student who I'd never met before who actually showed up there in San Francisco, a young woman by the name of Rachel Timoner, who I met for the very first time in a classroom in San Francisco because as a rabbinical student, she decided to join in this little mission that we took to participate in the rally up in Northern California. That worked out okay for Leo Baeck Temple and for the Jews more generally. And so early in I don't know, early, mid in the struggle for Americans to figure out some sort of a way to be of service to beating back the awfulness of this genocide. Rabbi Schulweis at Valley Beth Shalom, Rabbi Harold Schulweis, a legendary rabbi, Alav HaShalom, may his memory be a blessing forever, spoke very passionately about the need for all of us who understand as a people what it is to be on the receiving end of genocide, to be a force in combating genocide. And so an appointment was made here at Leo Baeck Temple with a woman who I had never met before, Janice Kaminer-Resnick, who, because the rabbi said so, and because she apparently had nothing else to do, she decided to launch an organization called Jewish World Watch, which continues to this day. If you've ever been a part of any of JWW's actions, it is founded on the back of the activism of Rabbi Harold Schulweis of blessed memory and Janice Kaminer-Resnick. Tell us a little bit about the founding of and the important work of JWW.
It was amazing. It is an amazing story. Rabbi Schulweis, and he gets complete and utter credit for the moral vision that underlies Jewish World Watch, because he established the idea. He was very passionate about the notion of, and this is not true at your synagogue, because I know your synagogue. He felt his congregation was getting too narrowly ethnocentric. He would call it solipsistic, where you're just sort of focused on Jewish problems, Jewish issues, the Holocaust, and he felt that that really missed the boat on his vision of what it means to be a Jew. And he felt, and some of you may know that he also co-founded the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous, which was an organization which he established really in New York with the assistance of a lot of Wall Street resources. That was a commitment to help Christians who had rescued Jews during the Holocaust. And because he felt that they were under-recognized, and that a lot of Jews, and it's easy, we all fall into this trap of saying, where were the rest of the Christians when Jews were being murdered? He had the insight and the sensitivity to realize how difficult it was. Let's say, okay, forget the ones that are blatantly Nazis or anti-Semitic. There were Germans and Poles that weren't actively anti-Semitic, but they would have to put their lives on the line and the lives of their families on the line, and we under-recognize that. Those that actually did, and I had the opportunity through Rabbi Schulweis when I was in Poland and in Eastern Europe to meet some of the righteous, we call them righteous Gentiles, righteous Christians. But he really believed that Jews' perspective was getting way too narrow. So when the Darfur genocide began, he announced that he was going to start this organization, and he actually called me right before Rosh Hashanah, exactly, it was in 2004, so it was exactly 20 years ago. He called me and asked me if I would be able to lead a committee at the temple. And I said, well, this is really important. And I had this flash that I realized I never saw anybody else's genocide as my problem. I figured Jews were responsible, and you might feel the same way. I mean, we're sort of brought up in the post-Holocaust generation where our responsibility was to establish the memory and to not publicize, but memorialize the 6 million and to make sure the world understood what happened. So I never thought about anybody else's genocide, and there had been like 50 genocides since the Holocaust. And so I had this momentary flash, like a epiphany, that, oh my God, you know, that's probably how a lot of Christians, sort of indifferent to the genocide of the other, not that they're actively supporting it, but just don't think about it. And I realized that was me. And so I immediately, it really resonated with me to do a correction of my own thinking, and I was very honored that he asked me to do that. And I actually, that's when I quit my law practice that year, to be able to, I mean, I wanted to retire from law because there were other things I wanted to do. I just didn't know what it was at the time. And, and so I began this with Rabbi Schulweis. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of really heavy-duty grassroots work, calling every rabbi. Rabbi Schulweis would call the rabbis. I would meet with Congress. Beverly Cohen was very involved, and just started a real grassroots effort to educate people. And and the community was so amazing, because once people were sort of given the opportunity to activate, they did activate, and they took that sentiment they had about memorializing the 6 million and the horror of the Holocaust and began to apply it to other genocides. And it was very successful. We had, you know, major projects. We still have a lot of projects. We had a lot of high schools mobilized. We'd be in, Rabbi Schulweis was very proud of the fact that we went to all the Catholic high schools. And he, you know, he really loved that. He would come with me to do those speaking engagements because he loved interacting with the clergy and with the teachers and with the kids. Because if you've ever met Rabbi Schulweis, he was very intellectual and not like down to earth for most people. He wasn't like, you know, sitting around with the microphone in his hand schmoozing, although he did as he got older. But at first he was very lofty, you know, very...
He was smarter than your rabbi.
No, he was different. He was different. No, just different.
Just
not
playing,
smarter.
just playing,
He
just playing.
was- No, he was.
I was also a tremendous, Harold, from the minute I arrived in town, rolled out the red carpet and became a friend and a mentor. And I really can't say enough adoring things about Rabbi Harold Schulweis of Valley Beth Shalom. Died just a week apart from Rabbi Bierman. I mean, two giant
Yeah,
pillars.
giant.
I remember being at the sanctuary at VBS, that beautiful service to memorialize Rabbi Schulweis. And I remember I went from there to go visit Rabbi Bierman in the hospital, knowing that he was gravely ill. We didn't know, obviously, nobody ever knows when someone's going to die, but it was just a week later that we were, I mean, for Los Angeles, it was just an extraordinary time of loss, those two giants of our Jewish community.
But it was just a real honor to work so closely with Rabbi Schulweis and to be able, towards the end of his life, I mean, he was well into his 80s when we started. He would be 101, I think, now. To be able to help, to be able to help a vision of his become a reality was really one of the great honors of my life. And I know that it was something he was extremely proud of, that what we were able to accomplish. It's a very difficult time right now for Jewish World Watch because, you know, the whole situation of COVID really hurt us because the grassroots organizing really was difficult. And then October 7th has really, it's not a great time for for
Looking
Jews
outward.
to be thinking of outwardly. So we have a lot of challenges right now. Our projects continue and our activism continues, but it's scaled back. Many rabbis felt like for the first year after October 7th, we really, should not be out there because in a bigger way for things other than Israel, because Israel's being accused itself of a genocide, and it gets way too complicated to start explaining to people why this is different. And it's not a genocide. It is not a genocide what's going on. It's horrible what's happening in the Middle East, but it's not a genocide. But it became very difficult for our college program, the college students. So right now we're sort of in a suspended state in terms of our grassroots work, but we're still very, very much alive in terms of our actual work. There's terrible things going on right now in Sudan.
This is what I was about to say. Tragically, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Sudan is home to genocide once again, and we are unfortunately living through a time where the world has so many hotspots of violence and unrest that it can't even manage to work its way onto the radar screen in the same way that it did in 2004 when we were all out organizing with regard to Sudan. So, that gives you a little bit of the backdrop. Again, Kfar Dai, Dayenu, that would be enough, right? But 2 weeks into the Trump administration, in early 2017, the Muslim ban takes place. And some of you were involved in some of the organizing that we did down at the airport. We were involved in marching along the airport concourse. And in other places as well with regard to resistance to the abuses of the Muslim ban. The concern at the time among a number of us was that the Jewish community, along the lines of what Janice was just describing was the purpose of JWW, that it was not speaking loudly enough with regard to the excesses, the disenfranchisement of minority populations that weren't us. And in this instance, the Muslim population in particular. And so I remember getting a phone call from Professor David Myers at UCLA, friend of our congregation for a long, long time. David and his wife, Nomi Stolzenberg, were going to host a meeting in their living room. And they invited over about, what would you say, 20, 25, a circle of whatever could fit in their living room. There was a circle of leading Jewish progressives to open a conversation about how do we make sure that the world does not see that LA's Jewish community is effectively acquiescing to this, that we're okay with this. We want to make sure that there's some sort of a vehicle for the collective voice of the Jewish community in Los Angeles to be heard saying, we're not okay with this just because it's not aimed at us. And so that gathering included a lot of folks who I'm sure you would know and recognize, some a part of our congregation, others friends to our congregation. Janice was a part of that gathering. I was a part of that gathering. And from it was founded pretty quickly an organization by the name of Jews United for Democracy and Justice. That is where Judge came to be. And some of you will remember that in that very early going, we were attempting to enlist members of the Jewish community, whether they were parts of synagogues or not, to sign on to a foundational statement that went onto the Judge website. In fact, I think it's still there, is it not? Yeah. So if you go to the Judge website to this day, you can see the foundational statement that was those of us who were rabbis were out there shilling it to other rabbis. Those who were attorneys were sharing it with their attorney friends. If you were part of a congregation, you were sharing it with others within your community. And we ended up having, do you remember the full number of signees? That's what I was about to say. It was somewhere, I thought, between 2,000 and 3,000 Jewish Los Angelinos.
Yeah, that was over like from
It happened
Friday to Monday.
very, very quickly. And then I remember getting a phone call from the LA Times because they were doing a story on this saying, oh, LA's Jews in the numbers of the thousands are speaking out with regard to what's happening to the Islamic community. So this was the foundation of what became Judge. And there was a number of different foci in the early going of Judge's existence, including action, certainly organizing to create a collective voice at that time in a way that we felt in LA it was much too silent from the legacy Jewish institutions. And then a part of that work included bringing in some extraordinary folks to have amazing gatherings, judge gatherings, hosted at numerous congregations. Ours, of course, because I was one of the early organizers of Judge, we were one of the early hosts, of course, for some of those programs. I'm trying to remember some of the ones that actually took place here. George Mitchell was here.
And what's her name? Roberta Kaplan.
Oh, Robbie Kaplan and Amy Spitalnik, having to do with the Charlottesville lawsuit. So if you were at those programs, there were others as well that took place in our sanctuary. Those were Judge programs. And it was great. We were able to bring in some extraordinary folks to help to focus our attention on this moment, how to create a lens through which to see the uniqueness of this moment and what was our purpose as Jews, as a collective Jewish voice in that moment. And then, actually, that particular program that Janice just referenced, the one with Robbie Kaplan and Amy Spitalnik, took place in January of 2020.
Oh, I think it was our last
It was the end of January 2020. And then a few weeks later, bang, COVID, everything is shut down. And all of us in Judge universe are shrieing, oh my gosh, we've had this good thing going. We've held these events at Temple Israel of Hollywood and Temple Isaiah and Valley Beth Shalom and Stephen Wise and Leo Beck Temple, and we've had 3 and 4 and 5 and 600 people attending these extraordinary events of ours. This is unfortunate. This great momentum that we've created is going to now go asunder. Somebody didn't think that was exactly the way it was going to end up working out. How did we move to taking that enterprise online such that now, well, I'll just say this. There was, during the peak of the pandemic, I don't know who did this, but I remember reading about it online. Someone attempted to kind of create the Jewish programming online Nielsen ratings, kind of say, here's what people are looking at online while they're stuck in their homes, if they're Jews, and they want to see programming that's going on out there for them. And of course, our synagogue was doing programming. Every synagogue was doing programming. We were doing the best we could online to keep people connected to one another. So the Jewish Nielsen ratings were out there, and it was a lot like if you looked at the historic Nielsen ratings of like how many Super Bowls you see listed on the top 50 programs of all time. I remember seeing like they listed the top 50 programs in the Jewish programming online world during the pandemic, and like 27 of them were Judge programs. So how does this happen? Other than just because you want something really big done, you ask a busy person.
Well, that is not the way, I mean, that's probably a true statement, you ask a busy person. But out of that organizing effort, there were 4 or 5 of us who sort of embraced the leadership of Jews United for Democracy and Justice. And some of them had full-time jobs, so they could not be as invested. Others of us, we were full-time volunteers. And one of those full-time volunteers was, may he rest in peace, David Lehrer. David Lehrer, you probably all know him. He was the director for many years of the Western States of the ADL. And probably 20 years ago or 25 years ago, he left the ADL and started his own little community relations nonprofit. David was an extraordinary person, extremely energetic. And he and me and your rabbi, and despite his full-time job, I know what it means to be, we have a lot of rabbis in my family, so I know that a full-time job for a rabbi is 2 full-time jobs. So that's very commendable. And Zev Yaroslavsky and Mel Levine. And Zev had a full-time job. Mel works as a lawyer, former congressman. So David and I were the ones that decided on a full-time basis we would continue to work on this. But David and I thought, like probably everybody did, that we'd have a month or 2 of quarantine. And we said, people will be bored. We'll give them something to do. We'll increase our audience for the next few weeks, and we'll do a program a week. And we thought that that was going to be a short-term thing, and this was in March of 2020. And we set up our first program with Jennifer Rubin. That was who our first program was with online. And I think it was like April 1st or March 30th, right around there. And we let our 3,000 person list. That was our only list. We don't buy lists. We're not a marketing enterprise. We don't know what we're doing. We just send it out to David's list from his little organization, which was a small list, and our list of 3,000. And that's how we were usually getting between 400 and 700 people at these weekly, monthly in-person programs. Well, that very first program we got, David used to keep such good records of this, and I miss him for so many reasons, and that's one. I'm not good with that kind of analytics. So the first program, we had 1,000 people. So we were very pleased. We said, oh, this is great. We'll, get more people educated, which was our mission. Our mission was to educate and to mobilize, and we were trying to use more conservative speakers so we'd bring in more independent voters, Republican voters, people who didn't already see it the way that necessarily we saw it. We want, what? The right way, right? No, we want, this was a basic civil rights and civil liberties argument that this is very bad for our democracy. It's very bad for people who believe in the Constitution and the future of this country. So we wanted to appeal broadly. So Jennifer Rubin was a Republican from LA. She was a labor lawyer, and she works for the Washington Post. You've probably seen her many times on our show. She was our first speaker, and she attracted about 1,000 people. By the next week, I have to go back and look who our second, by the fourth week of this, we were up to 4,000 connections. And it was all word of mouth. So we realized we sort of had a tiger by the tail, and we could make a much bigger impact on Zoom, which we had never used before, ever. And it was a whole new universe.
And the breadth of who we could get, because all they had to do was click a button. Back in the day, if we're bringing George Mitchell here, we got to fly him. His family came along with him. We're putting them up. We're having to. There's a whole lot, both cost and just logistics, and the person who you're trying to get has to be able to carve out that amount of time in order to come. Here, you got Mel Levine and Zev Yaroslavsky calling up all their best political friends. Hey, David Axelrod, do you have an hour where you can just click the button and come on to Janice's program? All of a sudden, we've got David Axelrod, and you name it, everybody under the sun coming to be a part of this program.
Exactly. So it was logistically a real boon to the cause that quarantine happened, because it was a fraction of the cost. And we could do 6 or 7 or 8 programs online for the cost of one program. We were giving modest honorariums. These are people that otherwise you'd have to spend $10,000 having them come and speak, and now for a very modest sum for the 1 hour and no other expenses related to it. So, because we all are volunteers. So it ended up, it just started like that, and then of course 2 months became 4 months, became 6 months, became 2 years of quarantine, and by that time, David and I had it down to a science in terms of producing weekly programs, and we'd spend all of our time finding the right speakers. What do we think the issues are going to be 2 months from now? Who is the best spokesman to talk about it? And we just built this and sustained it, and it's just so tragic. Last October 27th, David Lair quite suddenly deceased. He had a pulmonary embolism. It was just such a shock to everybody, to his family. He was not sick. He had just come back from like a 30-mile bike ride the day before. He had been hiking in Yosemite the month before. He was totally healthy. So it was quite a shock, and it's been a big loss in so many ways. But for me personally, he was my day-to-day partner. We would talk 5-6 times a day, and we were just soulmates. We had met in 1975 when I started working. Marlene Grossman's here. I think I met Marlene in 1975 or 1976 in the Soviet Jewry movement also. I should have mentioned that. I met him then. He started working for the ADL I started when it was 590, and I think he did too, 590 North Vermont. If any of you remember, that's where the Federation used to be. We both started working around the same week. Him for the ADL, Harvey Schechter was his boss. He was a civil rights lawyer working for the ADL, and I was a young intern with the Federation, with the Community Relations Committee, and we met there. And he was always a friend and a great person, somebody I really admired, and a fun guy. Anybody who knows him, he was just lively, fun, brilliant man, and it's a huge loss to the community. On October 20th, we're going to memorialize him on our program. But it became so important. The notes we'd get from people like you, the donations, it's all self-sustaining. We try not to do heavy-duty fundraising, but every week, we get at least 100 small donations, and they add up to enough money to sustain this program. And I said, as long as the community keeps coming and supporting it, we will continue to do the programs. So, and I mean, the appreciation from our audience is really amazing. And I mentioned this on the last few programs. About 2 months ago, maybe a month ago, we did a poll, and we got 90% response from people on the poll. I mean, right there online. And like 94% wanted to move to 2 times a week. And by God, they come. You come to the programs. And it's so satisfying to be able to work hard, produce quality programs, get really great speakers, and have people who are so smart and so curious and so committed that they come to the programs. I would never abandon this project because of that. So it's like people like you that make this a success, and you know, we're sort of tagging along because of the commitment of our audience.
It has been, obviously, this succeeded wildly beyond any of our imaginations when we were busy founding Judge, and when we introduced programming as a piece of what we imagined doing with Judge. The idea that there would be thousands every week and that the kind of guests that we would be having on a regular basis, none of that was even remotely on the radar screen. But it was sure exciting to see happen, and the reach is beyond what you probably can even imagine. It happens frequently at this point. I'm officiating a bar mitzvah, and someone will come in and they'll say, "Hi, I'm Aunt, I'm Uncle Shloimi from Toronto, and I recognize your name from the Judge programming that I attend every single week. You're a member of the Judge team, and I just want to thank you for that extraordinary program." And they're coming from, I picked Toronto because that's actually a true story. They're not only coming from the United States. I got folks, so far I don't know that I've had anybody accost me with thanks for Judge who was outside of North America, but I'm quite sure that there probably are. We probably do have an audience outside of North America. But Australia.
We have some from Australia.
There you go. So it's just been an amazing success story, and I know so many of you enjoy participating, which is why I want to turn this conversation over to all of you. What questions do you have for Janice, whether it's specifically about America at a Crossroads? This is a great chance to find out about the inner workings of that program or where it may be headed next, or about any of the rest of her extraordinary can-do resume.
Well, I have a comment. Janice, I'm so I'm thrilled that you're here and thrilled to know you. Last week, I believe, when Max Boot was on, and the sound, Warren Olney's sound wasn't happening, it was as though you were just talking to me, like, get over it, listen to the responses, and let's move on. It was so real, so you, and thank you for that. What did happen to the sound?
Okay, well, this has been a proverbial problem with Warren's system, and we've been working with him on it. And I really do, when people complain about the sound, I really do try to get them to focus on the response, because from the response you can still learn, but people get very fixated on if the sound's bothering them, they just focus on that. And I really try to respond to all. I got like 100 chats during that program, maybe more, and I really tried to respond to each one so they could just refocus what you're listening to. We do not have a professional studio. Everybody's on their computers at their homes, and we do the best we can. But we've worked with Warren. Warren, he's almost 90 years old. He's not as he doesn't articulate. He's very smart and very articulate. He doesn't articulate, and he never did. If you go back and watch him younger, he didn't have really clear enunciation, but he was so smart and so gifted as a journalist that it was never an issue. It's become more of an issue. But he doesn't like to wear the big headphones and use the external mic because he's a little vain about the headphones. So we've asked him now. I think you'll see next week. I think he's on the program next week. He will be using his headphones and an external mic, and it's very sweet because Larry Mantle offered to go over to his house and help him with his sound. But we're working on it. But sometimes also what happened that day that made it particularly bad is that Jeff, our techie guy, got stuck in a traffic jam. He's got another full-time job. We're just a little couple hours of his week, and he was late getting home. So he didn't get on till 4 to 5. And usually we come on at 4:45 and we do sound checking. So this week we didn't do a sound check. And Warren doesn't really know how to go inside the computer, and I don't either, by the way, to lift up, you know, for internal mechanisms of the sound system. And usually Jeff can guide us through that, and it didn't happen that day. So it was a particularly, I get a lot of complaints about Warren's sound, which we're really working on. It's not all Warren, it's probably the connection in Marina Del Rey, it's probably other things as well. But that's what happened, and I try, and then he sometimes can't find the chat. So, you know, he's very dear, and he's extremely prepared, and he's very talented, and so we're working with him on it.
Okay. Comments, questions? Nancy?
Well, I'm grateful for these programs. They are remarkable, and also, like I told Janice, that my Machatunum in Denver listen, and it brings us closer because we talk after, and I'm going to send a photograph. It's really very special. I'm just wondering, how do you match the speaker with the interviewer, their particular,
Good question.
and how did you begin, how did you set up who the interviewers are, who, by the way, ask really good questions?
Yes,
I'm very impressed.
That's a very good question, because
Yeah,
we
okay.
considered it an extremely important part of our program, our moderators, and that was David Lehrer. David had relationships with David always, throughout his career, did programming. That was his, and he was very good at figuring out who would match well with whom. And so he had the relationships with, I think, all 4 of our moderators and recruited them to begin with, and we pay them because we want them to be prepared and we want to respect their professionalism, and we need their professionalism, because if you have a lay interviewer, it's very different than when you have a professional journalist interviewing. So they read the book before we get them the book. If somebody has written a book and is speaking about a book, they always read the book in advance. They're really, really talented and serious people. I have stopped since David died trying to match, and Zev and Mel and I do it basically randomly because they're all really good, and we don't want to look like, for the Israel speakers, we're using certain people that have a certain point of view, so we rotate them because they all have their own perspective on everything, and we don't want to look like we're favoring, you know, asking harder questions from one interviewer than another interviewer, so, or more challenging of Israel's position, especially on the Israel programming, or you know, uniquely Jewish, sort of more Jewish programming. So I do it rotationally and try to equalize the number of programs they each have. But we have a very collegial relationship. We get together, all of us, you know, once a year at least for dinner, and we talk. We get their ideas for who they would like to interview, who are people that they've interviewed that they think would be interesting for our audience, because they all have a real feel for our audience now after so many interviews and so many years. But it's a good question, because I was very anxious for a lot of reasons. When David died, how would I ever know how to match up like he did? Because that was something he did. And we just decided not to worry about it, and it's worked out fine.
My name is Glenn Gottlieb. You are my hero.
Oh.
I told you that at Charlene's a couple years ago. It's just a thrill. Just as a matter of pure, prurient interest, do you know who the most popular speaker or speakers that you've had have been, and if there are any speakers that you got more complaints about for some reason? Just curiosity.
Yes. I know this because when we get to near 5,000, we're worried that our capacity in our Zoom room is 5,000, so I have to keep track of these questions. People loved George Will, and we had a huge crowd and overflow on that one. Now, it's interesting. I mean, George Will's such a character, such an interesting guy, with his martini and his bow tie, and it was just such a funny program for us. And I think part of it, I forget if it was in the green room, but he loves baseball. You know, he's written books on baseball. Big baseball guy. He talks, I forget if it was on the show if he talked about baseball, but we spent a lot of time. Mel and Zev are big sports fans, so I'm used to them chatting in the green room about sports all the time. So I sort of tune out because it's not my thing, unless my kids are on the teams or my grandkids, and then I'm that I'm right there. But so those were very popular. Doris Kearns Goodwin was extremely popular. I mean, she was. It took us a year to negotiate a contract with Doris Kearns Goodwin. We actually had to sign a contract with her speaking. She's got a speaking agent, and so that was. But it, you know, she attracted a big audience. Max Boot sometimes gets a very big crowd. He always over 4,000 for Max Boot. And you know, 4,000 connections is about 6,000 people. We have a lot of people who watch in twos. And we polled for that too. About 40%, 35% of our audience watch in doubles. Those were big ones. And then it's situational. So when there's a big crisis in Israel, Dennis Ross can get 5,000. Our early, like our first couple Israel in crisis programs before October 7th, we had some democracy, following the democracy movement in Israel. Those were extremely popular programs. So a lot of it depends on what's going on that week. If something really big crisis, it gets higher. Now that we have 2 programs a week, the numbers are a little lower per program because they can sort of choose, do I want to go to an American democracy program or do I want to go to an Israel program? We're going to go back to 1 a week for my sanity after the election. So I just scheduled some of our January. We have Joyce Vance coming in January, she's wonderful and has not been available to us. Joyce Vance, who was a U.S. attorney or is still, I think, I forget in what district, but she's on MSNBC all the time. She's quite brilliant.
The sisters-in-law.
Your sister-in-law is?
No.
Oh.
That's her podcast.
Oh, yeah, sisters-in-law. I don't listen to podcasts. I don't listen to podcasts in general. I prefer reading. So if people send me, I listen to a couple of podcasts. Simon Rosenberg, I like his podcast because he makes me feel more optimistic than many. But those are some of the most popular. But David used to do all of our analytics. And so I realized, I hired somebody recently to sort of do analytics, but I realized how much time it's taking me, and I'm not sure it's productive because it's just informing me of what happened, but it doesn't really guide me for the future because I'm going to get the speakers we're going to get. So I'm really in a quandary about whether, and same thing with social media. Like somebody said, well, because we wanted to grow our audience bigger pre-election, thinking we'd have a bigger impact. So I hired a team to do some social media, but it's really not, you don't get instant results from any of this. It's like over the course of time. So I'm having real second thoughts about investing in all of that stuff and just our best way to grow our audience is through our audience. We ask you to send it to friends, we ask you to share the link, and that's really been the most productive as far as increasing our crowd. It's really hard to get over 5,000. It's very, if we had Clinton on or some of those people, we'd get more, but they go other places. Like you can hear him for an hour on, certain programs. But the people we get, they don't have an hour. That's why, Dennis Ross loves coming onto our program because he said, I get to go into nuance and I get to talk for a full hour and explain myself in more than 3 to 4 minutes. And Max Boot feels the same way. They're able to give their full, it's not full because you could go on for hours, but that's why they like the program. And that's why we have sort of unique, a lot of them have said that, and if you look at the Washington Post and some of the other news outlets that do these kind of programs, I don't think proportionally they get, they should have a much bigger audience given how, but a lot of these journalists have said that we're consistently have a higher quality programming.
Have you ever gotten any complaints about it?
Maybe 1 or 2, but nothing. I get more complaints about technical issues than about content. So I do get complaints, and some people are nasty. I get nasty emails, and I always say, if you ask me politely, I'll respond. That's my response. If somebody asks nasty, they assume we have this massive staff, and I respond to all the emails. I'm the only one that gets the emails. Zev and Mel don't respond to emails, and I'll send them this. I said, how would you respond? I wouldn't. That's what they, I wouldn't respond. But maybe it's the mother in me. I don't know what it is, but I feel like if people politely ask, I will respond, but not when they're nasty. So I'll say, please reframe. in a way that's polite, and I will respond to you. I say, I'm such a mother. I mean, I can't help it.
Do they actually reframe, or do they just go away?
And sometimes they go away, but we have some that just consistently complain. And I want to say, I'll give you a full refund for this free program. And my husband's always saying, he says, don't respond, don't respond. I think all the males say, don't respond, don't respond. So sometimes I will respond by saying, I won't say nasty things. I won't do that, because that's not nice. But, I will say, we're doing the best we can, or, we don't have the budget for a studio. And by the way, we have no staff, because I always say, can you please tell your staff that? No, because I have none.
Jews kvetch. It's just.
I know. I know that. I know. That's how I
Janice?
know we have a very Jewish audience.
The depth of your experience is really quite phenomenal, and trustworthy. And I would just like to know at this moment, what keeps you up at night? What one or two things are keeping you up at night right now?
Well, I have to say, for the first time last night, I had an October 7th nightmare. Israel keeps me up right now. I mean, I'm sure I speak for a lot of you about its future existence. That's really something that's on my mind. And our American democracy keeps me up. And also, the growing conservatism in the Jewish community keeps me up. I'm really concerned about those people who feel that our democracy is a done deal and a sure deal. I feel the pluralistic nature of our American democracy is fundamental to Jewish survival and to Israel's survival. And I see those as very intertwined. So other than the fact that my kids, grandkids' health, my mother, my husband, those things that all of us worry about. But I think, the existential issues about Israel, about our democracy. But last night I actually had, at 3:15 in the morning, I woke up, I had a dream about terrorists coming down a mountain, and I'm on the board of the USC School of Social Work, by the way, and the friend of mine who is the chair of the board and I were in a forest, and there were terrorists coming at us, and I couldn't help but think, and it was in the Middle East, I think it was in Israel, and I was hiding behind a palm tree, and I told my daughter this morning on the way here about the dream. She says, well, that was a really stupid place to hide because the palm trees are very small. So thank you. I'll have to tell myself.
It was a dream, dear.
I hadn't thought about that. It was a big palm tree. Anyway, but I shouldn't make light of it, but it was, today's September 11th. Next month is October 7th. It's very frightening, the condition of the world, the lack of humanity, the lack of manners, respect, and the lack of worthiness of respect of some of our political leaders. That's really upsetting. Yeah, I think that's. Yeah, I'm here. I'm lucky. We're lucky.
I want to thank you. I feel as if I know you. I don't think we've missed maybe 2 or 3 of the programs, and then we go back and watch them. And it was a lifesaver. And I remember being at the temple for Robbie Kaplan, that talk. I think you do an amazing job. And it was so important to us during the lockdown, during COVID, that we would set aside Wednesday afternoon, sit outside, have a glass of wine, have our iPad set up, and listen. And I think I wrote that to you, and when I made a donation, I told friends all across the country. I think my brother is on this Zoom because I told him, and he religiously watches every week, and he'll even say, are you tuning in? From Massachusetts and friends of ours in Connecticut, et cetera. But I want to go back to something you said at the very beginning when you did environmental law. And this is not a suggestion, but with all the things happening in this world, which are overwhelming, it would be kind of interesting if you would go back to your environmental law days and I think the environment is one of the existential threats. We have so many threats at this point, but I think in some ways it overrides everything else because it's causing droughts, which are causing, I mean, that's one of the things that's causing the migration issue. So is there anybody that you can think of who would be a good person to have? Bill McKibben or whatever?
You're talking about bringing somebody on
Yeah,
to the program,
somebody
talking about
else.
climate
I'm
change.
just making a.
Yes, I think it's a good suggestion. We have really not had a program dedicated to climate change. Now we're sort of in a pre-election mode, but I think it's a really important suggestion. I mean, I don't know if I put, it's hard to have, you know, the issues aren't competing with each other. We have a lot of existential crises, one of which, a major one, is climate change. And I think I will take your suggestion and actually act on that after the election.
You could have a foot in both worlds by asking Al Gore to do the
Well,
program.
that would be a draw.
Yeah. Said you'd have a foot in both of the worlds, kind of the
That's
familiar programming of Judge alongside the environmental concerns by inviting Al Gore, if we could get him to do it.
That would be, and
Yeah.
if people have connections to people you think would be good speakers. People make suggestions, by the way, you know, a lot to us, and some of them we've followed, and we've been able to have, you know, interesting people that we might not have thought about. So, but I like your suggestion, and you know, we've thought about it, we just haven't acted on it. I mean, there's a lot of programming about, there's a lot of programming in general about climate change. It might be interesting to have like rabbinic views on climate change. I mean, there is, you know, there's a lot of interesting different angles you could look at climate change. But I mean, we'll think about doing a program on that early next year.
Hey, Janice. Gary Stern, how are you? We'll talk afterwards. I first met you in late 70s when I worked with Hirsch Rosenthal and Henry Waxman. It's
Right.
a long, long time ago.
Long time ago.
I've been thinking a lot about an answer to a question that was yesterday, something along the lines of, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And the answer, of course, 4 years ago is right in the middle of the pandemic, and how could any sane human say that they were better off then? But that goes with the issue of Zoom itself and and what has happened to people's habits regarding in-person education versus Zoom. Zoom is wonderful, and its advent was incredible. My concern is that people are going to get so used to staying home on their screens that we become a society of, I write that we're three-dimensional people being forced into a two-dimensional world, and I'm really concerned another generation or two. What are your thoughts about Zoom itself and the explosion post-pandemic and the fact that now it's become habit?
I think for our program, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. I think the issue that you raise is much bigger amongst young people than it is amongst seniors. Our audience is largely seniors, and many of them are isolated already. So this actually helps to de-isolate them a little bit by giving them something interesting to engage with. And I mean, for young people, I really think it's a serious problem, the technology, and there's so much data on this subject. In fact, Jonathan Haidt, who is the sociologist, writes about the isolationism. And we actually had him on our program, and after he finishes this book he's working on, which he's been working on for a year and a half, he's a social psychologist. We're going to have him back on, and that's sort of one of his topics. So, I mean, I don't worry about it with our program because our advantages are so much greater than our disadvantage, and it's not a problem we're addressing as a community of Judge. I think it's a problem that the Judge community should address about the younger generation and the dependence on technology and cell phones and everybody isolating and, you know, not relating to other people, not getting married, not having children, the whole syndrome that comes with being sort of self-centered. Rabbi Schulweis, and I'm sure your rabbi, I mean, you've probably sermonized on the topic. I mean, this is a major social issue. So I agree with you, Gary, but I'm not concerned about it with our program.
Well,
That was such a lofty question. I hate to follow, but because I was just going to make a few specific ideas of things that I think I might like to see you do. I don't know if you've ever done, the historians, John Meacham and Michael Beschloss. Sometimes when they're on MSNBC, I feel like they give us some perspective, like we're not living in a world that is going so awry that we've been down these roads before and come out of it and so forth. But so that was one idea. The other thing that came to me is maybe bringing more women, illustrious women into it, even women in government, some of the women governors, some of the women in Congress would be, it feels like maybe we haven't heard so much from some of them. So just some ideas.
We have tried for 3 years now to get both Beschloss and Meacham. I have somebody else now working on Meacham. They're really hard to access. They're not that interested in the program. If anybody has any connections, we would love that. But I actually have a former journalist friend of mine. I said, you're good at digging. Dig, 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 push, 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 try to get us. And I gave her a list. Stephen Breyer was one. There were a few people that we've not succeeded in reaching that I've asked her to reach. On the women's front, Congress people likely not, because then we get the problem of we can't really bring any Republican Congress people on. So we wouldn't want to just have Democrats. We are nonpartisan, and we have a substantial part of our audience that are not Democrats, believe it or not. So it would be problematic. But we've had Gretchen Whitmer. We can have governors on. That actually works well. And we are mindful. David never liked the idea of equal. He said we go after the speaker, not after the gender. So he was very much opposed to making sure we equalize. I'm more sensitive to that, and I have been trying to get more females. We've had at least 35% of our guests have been female, and of course 50% of our moderators are female. I think we can do a better job at that, and I'd love your suggestions about people you'd like to hear from, but it can't be partisan. It's got to be content driven and not politically driven. Well, we aren't going to have, all the Congress people right now in the Republican Party are MAGA, and we would never host a MAGA speaker. There's very few Republicans in Congress who I would trust on our program.
Even to the extent that they have, so many of them have deep, deep ambivalences, even more so. Some of them hate Trump more than you do, but they also recognize that for their political livelihood, they are absolutely, so if you're bringing them on the program, it doesn't really fit with the program.
Mark will be your last question because it's getting to be lunch.
Hi, Mark Luxman. I've got two groups of questions, and you can choose either one you want to address. One regarding long-term analytics. I know you have a record of how many attendees you have, how many registrations you have. Do you also include statistics going back to people that listen to podcasts after the fact? And do you recognize any kind of data that would drive future talks based on the combination of current administrations and also follow-up attendees? So that's the first area. Second, any interesting stories regarding the moderators? Anything interesting to share about them? Anything about the long-term commitment and their commitment to the program? Anything about Larry or Pat, as long as she has hats to wear, that you might want to share that we'd find interesting? Thanks.
Pat's funny because Pat lives in a very small apartment. I think it's like 400 square feet. And she's always worried about the background. That's one of the things, because Pat has a look. And we all know that from the years and years on Life and Times and different shows she's done. And so, we have to always make sure her hat's not, because she always has to put a screen or a fake backing. So that is a thing. Oh, I had a funny one with Carl Bernstein. He was not a moderator, but he had 4 pair of glasses and kept on asking us which pair of glasses does he look better in, which was really strange. That was one of the funnier, it was very funny. And it was very uncomfortable because, I don't care what glasses, I'm worried about my glasses. Wear whatever glasses you can see best in. as far as the first part of your question, analytics take a really long time. I don't have capacity to analyze it. We know how many people listen to podcasts. We get about 2,000 people listening to our programs after the fact during the week after. So we know that we have a consistent, more or less 1,000 by podcast and 1,000 by YouTube after. We don't know where they're from. We don't have any good data on the podcast people. I'm a little frustrated with being able, I ask people to gather this information. Now they've given me this information. I don't have the time to analyze what it means and what to do about it. So I've got to figure out, who can do that for me. I don't have the capacity to do that. So if anybody's really good at analytics and analyzing them or knows somebody, we do have funds. I do pay consultants to do this stuff. But now I'd have to figure out who's the right consultant to analyze the data. They're really good at giving it to me, but not, it's a whole different skill, is figuring out what to do with the data. So it's not something I find my time is better spent getting better speakers and working on each program. I do all those emails, I try to get articles to people, and that's a lot of time. And it's just a question of capacity.
Well, we always have capacity enough for you in person. We'll take you both ways. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And to Ken for...
Can I just
Go ahead.
Can I just thank your rabbi, because he was so supportive. This temple is so unique, and the contributions you make in the community are extraordinary. And having you help us, especially initially, get credibility, get signatures, get off the ground, and then your synagogue was just so supportive. So it's really an honor to be here, and I was very delighted. I know that Dodie called me.
And Peachy.
And Peachy Levy called me, who I both know them so many millions of years. Peachy and I worked together on the Hillel building. That was another project. I chaired the project to build a Hillel building. I did that with my dad, and that was a very fun project to work on with him. But, and it's just been a pleasure seeing you all in person and being able to be here with you today.
And for those of us remaining for lunch, we have Janice. So do join us. This is our maiden voyage of a recurring full-day program. We have lunch, and bring your own lunch, but we have things for you, more food over there for you to augment your lunch. But we have Norm Gee and yoga after that, and bridge and rummy cube. Not mahjong. I don't think we bought a set, but there we are, and we're going to keep doing this until we get it right.
I do want to say a quick word about next month, because this was actually something that came up at yesterday's senior staff meeting. We were all talking about the COE, and Rabbi Goldberg noticed the fact that because of the timing of all the holidays falling in October, literally all the holidays falling in October, that it meant that there was going to be this program, but then really not until November would the COE be able to kind of do its thing. And all of a sudden we started talking about the fact that when you think of over all these years, all the amazing kinds of things that the COE has done, it hasn't just had a Shabbat dinner where you guys could just kind of like hang with each other and make Shabbos with each other. There's the COE Shabbat every year where we're preparing to architect the Shabbat experience, but this was really more about come, be in receive mode and be with your COE friends, and we thought to do that on the Shabbat of Sukkot, where we could actually be observing the holiday, which is Zman Simchatenu, the season of our rejoicing, to celebrate the gift of one another in each other's lives. And so strongly encourage you, that Friday night of Sukkot is when this will be taking place. It was very intentional. If the weather allows, we'll actually have the dinner out there in the sukkah. In the event that it's, for whatever reason, like a couple of days ago, we're not going to do that to you, in which case we'll go out, we'll make some brachot, we'll make sure that you get a chance to say the blessing for being in the sukkah, and then we'll go and make sure that you eat someplace where you'll be able to live to have breakfast the following morning. So that is the 18th. Is that Friday?
Yeah, I think Friday.
Yeah.
I know, because I just did my sukkah planning.
Yep. So come and make Sukkot with all of us as a COE.
And I will say, Linda Thal, her class resumes this Friday at 10 o'clock. Wise aging, we want to be wise. We certainly are aging. And Dick Hutman, a week from today, he resumes Tales of Hoffman opera. Please, if you haven't done this, it's a Zoom. There's a link. It's always in LBT this week. And do join us. And thank you very much for coming. And again, can't thank you both enough. And thanks, Sue. Thanks for coming.
Oh, I enjoyed it very.
Within 3.5 years, too. Boy, girl, boy. And my daughter's best friend